Okay, so our next talk is by Chi Yhun Lo, and Chi is a postdoc in the lab, and he has worn various hats. He has multiple research projects, but one important one is leading our multi-site for sharing. And he's going to talk to us about his experience because he's done a fair amount of organization with 7 sites, and he's completed a registered report. So it's a nice model for how these multi-sites can go. I think that Chi has been in the lab for about 2.5 years, and his tenure in the lab is almost done. He'll be done at the end of the year, and it'll be a great loss. He's returning to Sydney after that. But he's going to share his good work on the multi-site project now.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. So I just want to clarify. So these are not amplified for the room. It's just for the benefit of our Zoom people. Okay. Okay, so it's a bit of a 2-part presentation where I'll talk about, number one, updates on the site, and then followed up by, I guess, recommendations of how we have conducted the SingWell, the multi-site SingWell project, and how that might be really useful for anyone else engaged in a multi-site process. And my colleagues are Ben Zendel, Ala Good, and Frank Russo. So I would argue that one of the greatest challenges we currently face is going to be hearing loss. By 2050, it is projected that we're going to have about 2.5 billion people with hearing loss. If we break this down into something just a little bit more manageable, if we look at just age-related or presbycusis, for example, it's going to impact 900 million people. So we're still talking about a massive number here. However, one of the really interesting things is that despite people knowing about their hearing loss and everything we know about it, most people are not actually going to do much about it. It's going to be left unaddressed. They're not going to use a hearing aid. They're not going to use a cochlear implant. And so for us, that is the population that we are currently interested in. And hearing loss is really important in modern industrial society when we think about how we operate. If we think about how society is sort of structured, busy social spaces are just inherently noisy. Like when we gather, we make noise. That's just how we are. And this is going to have an impact whether it's in the workplace, which a lot of workplaces are moving to more open plan spaces, or when we think about what happens in a recreational social setting, bars, clubs, restaurants, cafes. And so in the hearing loss literature, we have this quite a robust sort of cascading model of subsequent impacts. You have hearing loss and you then don't want to start engaging in these social activities. It's too much. That consequently leads you to become socially isolated and lonely. And we can take the cascade one step further, and now we're going to be impacting our overall quality of life as well as our cognition, very importantly. So really, it's very important that we take a step back. You go from the very start and try and address the problem. And so with the SingWell project, we're really interested in, obviously, group-based singing. And we tie into the mechanisms of how group-based singing can enhance some of the quality of life outcomes for individuals with hearing loss. And the 2 areas of interest are going to be communication challenges, so listening in noisy environments, and secondly, that psychosocial bonding, pro-social piece. So when it comes to this idea of speech and noise perception, a lot of our sort of theoretical and empirical sort of motivation comes from a lot of systematic reviews over the years now that really indicates that musicians, professionally trained musicians compared to non-musicians, seem to have an overall enhancement, particularly when it comes to speech and noise perception. So that's something we're really interested in leveraging. So the question is, well, these are professional musicians who have, 10 years of training. Does this apply if we provide 12 weeks of training? And to some extent, it does. And in fact, we have evidence of music training specifically now for older adults. And we do find a speech and noise benefit. And in this case, we can see here highlighted, the benefit really seems to happen when the noise is the most challenging when it's loud noise. The system kind of has to be pushed in order for any sort of musical training benefit to really come out. If we extend upon this, we also have evidence that music training is not just good for older adults, but it's specifically also good for older adults with hearing loss. And this was a choir-based training as well that came out of the Smart Lab. And in this case, we also found that speech and noise perception was enhanced. And this was linked specifically to neural pitch strength. So that's quite encouraging in the sense that, well, choir and group-based singing, it's all about hitting the notes. So this seems to tie in quite nicely. Now, so I've given you some idea that, okay, this is gonna work. On the other hand, we have Colette McKay, who had quite a scathing review and found that actually there's no evidence that music training has benefits for speech perception in hearing impaired listeners. But I want to sort of break down what her sort of, how she sort of came to that conclusion, okay? So the first thing is that I think, as Dawn has mentioned, this sort of intervention-based work is incredibly challenging. It's very hard to pull this work off. And in the case of looking at a special population of hearing loss, we have that added challenge where we always have a small sample size. In most of these studies, there's also a lack of randomized control trials. And sometimes even if they are an RCT design, in fact, they don't even have an active control group. It might just be a passive control group too. There were some instances where, they're making an inappropriate sort of interpretation of whatever the findings are in terms of this discussion of it. And there's also bias in how we recruit. And I think this is an issue probably for all of us. When we think about how we might be recruiting for a choir, we probably have a flyer. It's like, oh, come join our choir. But to some extent, that's going to limit your population and include certain biases inbuilt. So for us, that review was quite, it was a kick in the guts, to be perfectly honest. But we want to be doing good work. We want to be doing robust work, but we're limited when we have this special population that's hard to recruit. So hence, let's work on a multi-site. And I think it's something that's also really only possible within this specific sort of SingWell context where there's significant funding for a long period of time. It's quite an unusual grant to some extent. Okay, so how are we going to try and address all of these? Number one, it's a multi-site, so we're aiming for a large sample size. We are going for a completely randomized control trial with an control group, and all of our statistical analyses are pre-planned. As Frank mentioned, this has been submitted as a pre-registered protocol report. So basically, whatever we find, they will publish it. And again, in terms of trying to reduce this bias, we're recruiting specifically for, we advertise it as signing up for creative group activity or group therapy, like not specifically sign up for group singing. So hopefully eliminate that bias. In terms of our methodology, in a snapshot, we should have around 100 participants in each of our groups. It is an RCT. We are taking that extra step as well in terms of participant and experimenter blinding as well. So the participants are not going to be aware which group is considered the active or the control group because it's just a creative group therapy. And we also blind our experimenters. So they will be RAs who do not know what intervention these participants have been assigned to. Our participants are going to be 60 years and older with an unaddressed hearing loss. And we're primarily interested in speech and noise perception and emotional speech perception as well. We have the standard SingWell psychosocial questionnaires, and we'll be looking at heart rate variability too. I wanted to just take a little extra step and just talk about control groups in general. I think control groups are always incredibly challenging for our field. We're not quite like the pharmaceutical companies where you can have your placebo sugar pill. That's a really easy control for just about any pharmaceutical. In this case, we really had to try and distill, well, what do we think are the critical mechanisms? And for us, we're thinking about group-based singing. Well, it's a group facilitated activity. So we wanted to keep it group-based. We didn't want to look at solo against group, for example. And for us, I think the real key is the fact that it's synchronous. So we were thinking, okay, well, okay, we've got synchronous group singing. Why don't we flip it and look at like an asynchronous group? Hence, we decided on going with an audiobook club where the control group, they will be listening to an audiobook, they come in and they discuss it. And the other difference is it's still speech and hearing focused, but instead of singing, it's just vocalization speech. And that asynchronous nature, you know, they're not all talking at the same time, it's call and response. So we think that this should be quite a useful and good comparison group. And furthermore, the use of audiobooks is ecologically valid. It is a clinical recommendation when you have a diagnosis of hearing loss. If you get a hearing aid or a cochlear implant, you are encouraged to listen to audiobooks. So this to us it makes sense. So I just want to take another step back and just talk about how do we even approach the multi-site to begin with? Because this is it's such a beast, right? When you're dealing with researchers and leaders, professors all around the world, and you've got to, you know, it's always like herding cats, right? To work with any academic, but when you have a whole team of it, it's like, wow, it's an even bigger headache. So the first thing, I guess, for us in developing this project was, who are we going to have on our team, right? So team selection. And I was having a chat recently with one of my mentors and supervisors, Gurjeet Singh, at a conference, because he does so much collaboration with industry partners and everyone around the world. I was like, Gurjeet, how do you decide how to work with people? And he was just like, Chi, it's just a vibe check. It's just, you know, like if I can have a beer with them and like we get along, I'm going to collaborate with them. And to some extent, this is kind of the same for us to some extent. I think this is the whole point of coming to a symposium or a conference. You just want to see how you vibe with someone. Number one, you're going to know that they're doing robust work, that they have a good reputation. But number two, like if you can't get along with them, there's no point, right? So for us, we've got a good vibe. We've got a good team. We then had to develop that initial grant proposal. And this proved to be a real headache in the end when we had 7 sites. Okay, so we've got more than 7 sort of profs all around the world. And I'm somehow leading this and I'm the most junior out of all, right? So it's like, whoa, what's going on? But what we sort of decided was, you know, I was having a look at what everyone was recommending and what the approach would be. And it's sort of like, this is too much. This is just way too much. But at the same time, I was thinking, how is it going to be possible for us to achieve all of our outcomes, but also not sort of hold back our partners from necessarily doing what they want to be doing? So we decided on this idea of like extensibility or like an extendable design. So basically, what I displayed before, that's the core of what everyone at every site has to do. But if others, for example, if they have EEG expertise, MEG, or if they've got like FNIRS or an MRI machine, like if you want to incorporate that as part of the test battery, like you go ahead, I'm not going to hold you back, but you just do everything that I've requested of you first in our order. You can bring the participants in for another day or pay them more for another hour. So that was our approach. That sort of helped us where we're all geared towards this one goal, but everyone has a different interest and they can do their own thing too. And the thing that I found the most useful was actually generating the protocol paper. Up until this point, I would always get questions like, Chi, I can't remember what we're doing. Can you tell me, like, oh, is this the measure? Is this the measure? Finally, when we started writing this up, everyone shut up. It was fantastic. It was fantastic. So I recommend for any multi-site, like if you are working with lots of big teams, like develop that methods protocol from the start. Like that's going to help a lot. Everyone will be on the same page. It's also really useful thinking about the conceptualization of how the team is going to operate and the division of labor. So we have myself, Ben as the SingWell Hearing Loss Theme Leader, Arla and Frank as our SingWell co-directors, ultimately have oversight. In the purple, all of our site leads, they are in charge of making sure that their site is going to be up and running with their ethics, with their funding, with the recruitment of their choir leaders and the audiobook club. We've got Carmen and Sean as our statistical leads. So all of the stats, in terms of calculating how many people we needed for this for it, and all of our pre-analysis and all of our analysis, it's all sorted. And Helen Henshaw and Colette McKay, who wrote that scathing review, we strategically decided to recruit her as an advisor. So to some extent, she's an inbuilt reviewer too. So if we can appease her, then we're very confident that we've got a robust study. And as a little side note as well, it means that she can't review any of our work for the 5 years. So that's also really useful. And I think that's about it for me. I got to thank all of my collaborators as well. Please shoot me an email or ask me a question if you have any. Thank you.
Chi,
Yeah, it was brilliant. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Very clear and solid. Now, how do you diagnose hearing loss?
So we do it with the pure tone assessment. So that is the gold standard way of doing it. And for us, we're looking at those with a mild to moderate hearing loss. Generally, if you go above that moderate hearing loss, like it's quite unusual if you're going to leave that unaddressed. That's going to be quite that's really the point where you really need to use a hearing aid. Yeah. Yes, so it'll be 20 to 35 dB or 40 dB.
Be 25 to 40.
25 to 40.
Read
Yeah.
paper.
Yeah.
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 Oh, thank you. That was fantastic. Really well thought out, and congratulations on getting that methods protocol published. With the two groups, the control group, the audiobook club and the production group, in terms of the amount of actual singing that your intervention group is going to be doing versus the amount of speech that your participants are going to be doing in the audiobook club, are you expecting differences, or how might you handle differences in the actual amount of vocal production that your participants are going to be doing in each of these two groups? And might that affect?
I guess we're only really quantifying it in terms of time. So they're getting, it's an equal amount of time that they're going to be participating in the choir and the audiobook club. It would be interesting to see if there is a difference in, like, I don't know, how many syllables or phonemes that they are also getting as well. I don't know if we're going to have the capacity to do that, but I'll think about it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think in a previous study of Frank, what might have been Ella Dubinsky's. Yeah, I know.
Cited some of that.
Right, I saw it, but I think there was some training they were asked to do during the week.
Yes.
And are you
also
planning
have that.
to do that?
So because with the audiobook club, they have to be listening to the audiobook, like, sort of leading up to the week, so that we sort of have everything in the 1 hour sort of chapter. And so we have an equivalent 1 hour sort of homework for those in the choir group as well. And that will be like an ear training pitch task.
Yeah. So it's more than choir.
It's more than, it is more than choir.
And a future study will determine again, which it will, the extent to which it's choir versus.
It's a good point. It's not just choir. I call this
Choir plus.
Yeah, choir. I call when I teach a research methods course, and I call this using a heavy brick. Like, before we know whether a brick causes brain damage, let's start with the heaviest brick we can find, and then we'll narrow it down. But it's a great point. And one of our collaborators, Gunter Kreutz, really pushed back on this point that no, we can't go forward because we won't know if it's choir. But ultimately, we feel strongly that we're investing a lot here, and we want to use a heavy brick.
And first, methodologically, like, we wanted to match that 1 hour contribution that the audiobook club they have to do as a homework. So, well, it's like, let's add in 1 hour of something associated with singing.
Are you able to elaborate a little bit on the audiobooks being recommended for hearing loss and why?
So I've had an RA developing a standard operating procedure. What we're doing is we have a pool of about a dozen books. And so from that pool, the audiobook club will sort of collectively decide which book or books they want to sort of listen to. They are all quite sort of, you know, kind of family-friendly sort of books, but across a wide range of genres. And along with that as well, the RA has been developing, you know, we'll have a facilitator, an audiobook club facilitator, and they have prompts for certain questions as well for each of those books.
Welcome, Neurospinner.
I'm sorry I missed your presentation, but I'm just wondering, are you using just any audiobooks from the library, or are they special for people with hearing impairment?
No, yeah, they're just standard
okay.
audiobooks. Yeah, yeah.
Thanks.
I'm not aware of any that might be specifically tailored for a hearing loss population. Yeah.
Remember, these are mild to moderate hearing loss, so they can turn up the volume and hear things just fine. They're not profoundly deaf. Sure, sensory neural. There's at least 3. Yeah. Yeah. No, that won't be a concern here.
I have so many questions. I just think this is so exciting what you're doing, and the multi-site and all this work is just incredible. So congratulations. I'll just pick a few small ones. So first, it's kind of about with the audiobook and it being family friendly. And is the music side, is it going to be lyric based music, and will it be of similar themes? Are they sort of, you know, coming with singing about the same thing?
No,
Because
it's not really, it's because they're kind of different mediums. It's not like we're matching any of the songs with like the audiobook genres, for example. They are quite different. Yeah. Right.
Again, it's something to consider, because what is evoked from people is not just the act of singing and the enjoyment of that, but also what they're singing about, right? The words that they're saying. So just an idea. And my only other question is, what's the timeline for this? What's your plan of?
So we are hoping that originally I wanted to kick things off in this fall, but the protocol paper is actually still under review, but it got quite a nice review, so hopefully it's there. So we are not actually allowed to commence until that's accepted. But you know, we're heading into winter, so that's kind of a no-go zone anyway. So we're aiming for spring next year is when we will kick things off, hopefully. And then we hope that we'll be able to achieve everything basically by the end of next year in terms of most of the sites having their interventions.
Will each site have their singing group and a control group? So
yes,
each, yeah.
Yes.
And is there going to be a minimum and maximum number of people who need to be part of each group?
That's interesting. I feel like we would have discussed this at some point, but I don't know if we have a maximum, to be honest. We are aiming for 15 participants each. So 15 in the choir and 15 in the audiobook club, and across 7 sites. It's a nice problem to have if we go over. I think we could probably realistically have 20 and 20, and we would totally be fine. And we could probably go as low as 10 and 10 in each group as well. I'll go back, I'll look at the protocol and see if any of the reviewers asked that.
Yeah, I guess it was just wondering if you're trying to match, like if you've got 10 in the singing group, are you going to try and make sure you've got 10 in the audio?
Yeah, we want the 2 groups to be matched, but it's not like they have to be matched specifically, like they can be off by a little bit, is fine.
Okay, so